Vanessa, and I'm reading today John 12, verse 1 to 11. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, where Lazarus lived, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. Here a dinner was given in Jesus' honor. Martha served, while Lazarus was among those reaching at the table with him. Then Mary took about a pint of pure nard, an expensive perfume. She poured it on Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. But one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, who was later to betray him, objected, "Why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It was worth a year's wages." He did not say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. As a keeper of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. "Leave her alone," Jesus replied. "It was intended that she should save this perfume for the day of the burial. You will always have the poor among you, but you will not always have me." Meanwhile, a large crowd of Jews found out that Jesus was there and came, not only because of him, but also to save Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. So the thief priests made plans to kill Lazarus as well. For an account of him, many of the Jews were going over to Jesus and believing in him.
Thank you for reading, Vanessa, and thank you, team, for leading us in worship. My name is Kevin. I'd like to welcome you here today. And I just wonder if you've ever been in a situation where something comes and takes over the room. You don't want it to, it's uninvited, but it's there, and everything now is about that. You could actually be out at a restaurant enjoying your favorite meal, and someone sits down beside you, and they're wearing tons of cologne. And your meal becomes about that. You taste it. You ever seen that? Smelled that? Oh, yeah. For me, that is about too much Brut. When I was a kid, I had this fascination for Brut. I don't know why, but there's all sorts of wrong about that picture. Now, if you know what Brut is, this captures it. It's a brute wearing Brut. I was fascinated by Brut because all the men were wearing Brut, and I don't remember exactly what we were doing, but there was a church function at our house, and I knew my dad had a bottle of Brut in the bathroom. So I, for some reason, went into the bathroom, and I saw that bottle of Brut, and I thought, here's my chance. Here's my chance to be a brute. Here's my chance to be a man like all these other men. So I saw it, I opened up the bottle, I poured it out, and I let it flow. Liberally. Just Brut everywhere. And I walked back into the function. And I didn't think people noticed. I tried to act normal, but people looked at me and said, "Are you wearing Brut?" I said, No, I'm not wearing Brut. And I now have kind of like a superpower for smelling Brut. I know the smell of Brut. I can identify it immediately. And I'll never wear it again. If you wear it, my apologies to you today if you wear Brut. And I will tell you that in my research, I discovered you can still get Brut, 200 milliliters for $9.99 at Walmart. So go get yourself a bottle of Brut and be a brute. You'll never be the same again. But the thing about this is it does take over. It's invasive. No one asked permission to have a scent invade their space. It's just there. Scents don't listen to boundaries. You might not like it, but it'll cross that boundary. They are invasive. So I was thinking about this picture today in our scripture. I think generosity is like that. It is invasive. It'll cross boundaries, and it's not subtle. It does not tiptoe in when it's radical. Generosity is like this. It opens up the bottle, it pours it out, and it just lets it flow. And once it's out, it just invades the room and it changes the atmosphere. We're in John chapter 12 today, and Mary, Martha, and Lazarus are having an appreciation party for Jesus, because if you've ever been resurrected, you do a thank you party for the person that did that for you. And Lazarus was resurrected, so they're like, let's just have a thank you party for Jesus, because, I'm still recovering from my resurrection, but let's have a party. You can do all the work. So they're there. They have this party for Jesus and his disciples, and the smell of generosity is in the air. It's roasting lamb, and it smells delicious, and it's fresh baked bread. It's invading everything, this scent, this wonderful scent. It's like the smell of hospitality. And Mary of Bethany, there's a couple Marys in Scripture. This is Mary of Bethany, is at Jesus' feet where she likes to be. We know that in Luke chapter 10, she's also at Jesus' feet, while Martha, her sister, is on her feet doing all the work. Mary is here at Jesus' feet again. And she loves Jesus. But Mary is motivated. She is motivated to do something today. Her heart is full of love, it's full of gratitude, and she's motivated to express that love to Jesus. So she's got something planned. Is that working, Steve? Yeah, there. A couple more? Right, there we are. Thank you. She's got something planned. She's waiting for opportunity, and she sees something happen. She knows this is the moment. So what she's done is she has brought a bottle of nard with her. Nard! How many people wear nard? Nard is not as bad as Brut. It's a very expensive perfume. She's got 500 milliliters of nard. So imagine, I probably put 1 milliliter of Brut on. She's got 500 milliliters of nard, a pint of nard. It's super expensive, and she brings it with her intentionally. She's got a plan. Martha's thought of the one that always has a plan, but here Mary, Bethany, has a plan. She's intentional. So nard costs a lot of money. The wealthy use it to anoint themselves so they can smell wealthy. It's a sign of status. It's also very exotic. Some people put it in their drinks as kind of like this remedy, but it's also used to anoint the dead. It's a burial spice as well because it is so powerful. So she's got this pint of nard that costs a year's wages. See, it's a little more than Brut, right? So think of that. Brut is a good deal, you guys. Go get some. A year's wages. So this is what she does. Read this in verse 3. Then Mary took about a pint of pure nard, an expensive perfume. She poured it on Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. Filled with the fragrance. Yeah, I bet it was. Because I filled the house with the fragrance of Brut with just a dab. She poured the whole bottle of nard all over the place, 500 milliliters. Try it. The whole place is permeated with that smell. She opened up the bottle, she poured it out, and she just let it flow. Mary does something costly, because this was a costly thing to do. If you were there eating dinner, watching this scene, you might actually feel this feels a bit awkward, wouldn't you? I certainly would. Who is this lady interrupting my dinner, wiping someone's feet with her hair with a whole bottle of perfume? Now I can't get that smell out of my nose. I was eating my roast lamb and eating my bread, and all I can smell and taste is nard. It's everywhere. I've got to have a shower when I get home. It's in my hair. I'm sneezing. My eyes are watering. There's so much nard in the air. It overpowers everything. This is awkward. This act that Mary did took a bit of vulnerability and courage for her to do this. I mean, this isn't a normal behavior. to anoint someone's feet with a burial spice like this. And I would say, I don't know if they were finished eating, but I'd say the fancy dinner turned into a smelly dinner. I think it kind of ruined the dinner. I hope they were done, because nard's for dessert. And so she pours this out, and the thing is, Mary was willing to do something that was awkward. It was awkward. See, and I think generosity is like that. It's like that scent. It's not subtle. It doesn't tiptoe in. When generosity is in the room, it affects the atmosphere. It changes things. And once it's out, you can't stop it. It has an effect. It invades. It permeates. It fills the space with its own kind of aroma, and everything changes. She opened up the bottle. She poured it out, and she let it flow. She was motivated. She was intentional. She paid a cost, and she entered into awkwardness. Judas kind of ruined the moment. There's this beautiful thing happening, and Judas kind of ruined the moment. The room was filled with this sense of generosity and love, and Judas says this: "Why wasn't this perfume sold and the money given to the poor? It's worth a year's wages." Not very sensible. According to my spreadsheet, we should use this for the poor. It would be better. That sucked the air out of the room. It's a scene of love, and it just took over. It was like a negative thing that takes over and changes the atmosphere. It was warm, and now it feels cold. And I imagine it probably felt a little bit tense, because everyone's already feeling a bit awkward about this lavish act of generosity. What a waste. All over the floor. So much for the poor. So much for the poor. That's what I would have done, Judas says. I would have used it for the poor. No, I know on the surface it sounds really reasonable, actually. That's a pretty solid statement. You could have just used a teaspoon, would have been a lot. But a pint? It even sounds a bit righteous. It even sounds like Judas cares about the poor. He's worried about the poor, doesn't it? But John gives us an insight into Judas's heart. This is what was going on inside Judas's heart. He did not say this because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. As a keeper of the money bag, he used to help himself with what was put into it. And he's thinking, should have sold that nard. I could have taken some money out. That would have been good. This is what happens with these acts of opposition. Often when people speak strong words of righteousness and condemnation, it's a smokescreen for something else in their lives. This performative righteousness hides something underneath the surface. It sounds like he cares about the poor, but he doesn't. These are a deception for his greed. So Judas opposed her generosity. We have a bit of a contrast here that I think is interesting. The other story with Mary and Martha, we contrast Mary and Martha, but here the natural contrast is actually Mary and Judas. One has a heart of love that overflows with generosity. The other has a heart of selfishness that overflows with greed. One takes the stopper off, the other puts the stopper on. So Mary, she's got this heart that's wide open, overwhelmed with love for Jesus. Just overflowing with gratitude that she wants to express while she's at his feet, in his presence. She's not really calculating. She's responding. It's flowing out of her heart. It's not really calculated. She's not holding back. She's pouring out. The contrast is Judas. His heart is closed. His mind is calculating. There's nothing wrong with calculating, okay? But his mind is calculating for selfish gain, not for good things. He's calculating how much money he could have had from that nard. And he's performative. He says the right thing. What about the poor? But his heart is far from it. His words are a cover for his greed and the state of his heart. So do you see the contrast? Mary versus Judas. Generosity versus greed. Generosity opens the heart. Greed closes the heart. Generosity pours out love. Selfishness puts the cap on. Generosity lets it flow. Fear holds it back. But Jesus responds, and his response silences Judas. He says, "Leave her alone. It was intended that she should save this perfume for the day of my burial. You will always have the poor among you, but you will not always have me." Now, before I move on, I want to be really clear here. He's not dismissing the poor. Jesus' ministry was about the poor. He cared for the poor materially, the poor in the spirit. He's not dismissing caring for the poor. That's not what's going on here. It's not that the poor didn't matter. What he is saying is that this is an act of love that touched him deeply that he needed. And on another level, it symbolically said what was going to happen to Jesus. See, it touched him deeply. It touched his heart, and it meant something to him. So he receives this as a gift of love from Mary. She sees him as someone that she just loves, and her heart overflows with love for him. She knows she's loved, and he's touched by this. He feels it. He's impacted. Mary's act is impactful. She notices Jesus, and it has an impact on him, and Jesus says, "She has honored me." See, Jesus stays in the present and near with Mary at this moment and chooses to be in relation and just absorb all that love at this dinner. You know, generosity fundamentally is a reflection of God's love. It's a reflection of part of his character, who he is. Generosity is not about money, although it is. It's not about stuff, although it is. It's not just about those things. It's about opening up, pouring out, and just letting it flow. It's a reflection of God's own generosity, because we know that God didn't hold back, right? We know that God didn't hold back with us. He didn't say, let's calculate this cost. I think that's going a little too far. Let's be a bit less generous with people. No. Death and resurrection, that's too much. It wasn't like that. He just let it flow. It was abundant generosity. God opened up, he poured out his love, and he just let it flow on his people. And it took him to the cross and the resurrection. And he continues to pour it on his people today. See, and I think generosity and Jesus' example calls us to be a people like that, a people of generosity, to be generous with love and pouring out for others in acts that touch them. So generosity is the act of pouring out to meet people's needs and to touch their hearts. So we learn a lot from Mary about generosity. I think she teaches a lot. Generosity is motivated from the heart. It flows from the heart. It's something that comes from a heart that's been touched by God and transformed, and it comes from the inside and works its way outside. It flows from love, and God's love is the foundation of that. Generosity is intentional. It sees a need, and it responds to the need. It has its eyes open. It's considerate. Radical acts of generosity consider the person and see the need and act. And it goes beyond buying perfume. Generosity has a plan at its best. An intentionality. Generosity is costly. It will cost you something to be generous, to pour out like that. It might cost you time, money, or your gifts, but it will cost you something. Generosity can be awkward. When you see a need and you approach, it can be a very awkward interaction. You know what I'm talking about? Maybe you've been offered something and it felt awkward. Maybe you've offered something and it felt awkward. It's taking a risk and being vulnerable. It takes that step. Generosity is often opposed and met with resistance. Why are you spending money on that? Don't give them money, give it to the organization. What are you talking about? Their administrative costs are way too high. Don't give to them, give to someone else. Generosity is often opposed. Generosity is impactful. See, generosity touches the heart and touches a need of a person. And it sees someone and says, you actually matter. I see you and you matter, and I'm taking action. Generosity is the act of pouring out that meets people's needs and touches their hearts. So this is what we do, okay? We open up our hearts, we pour out, and we let it flow. Let's try it together, okay? I'm gonna help, okay? We open up our hearts, we pour it out, and we let it flow. That's what generosity does. A couple years ago, I was still a student in seminary. I didn't even mean that to be funny. In my mind, it just seems like that. We had 3 kids and not much money. And somehow, someone saw this need. Someone in our church saw this need. And it was a really interesting thing that happened because we were right at zero in our bank account. Actually, no, I think it was minus 1,000. You know that thing called overdraft? I think that's where we were at. And someone felt motivated to help us. I don't know what happened, but this motivation comes from love. Felt motivated to help us. And they were intentional. They prayed and prayed and prayed and decided that they would take some action. And they had a specific number in mind. They saw a need and they made a plan. And this plan did cost them some money. So it was costly. The awkward part is that they came to our door and we had no idea that they were going to do this, and they offered us some money. Awkward for us, awkward for them. It takes vulnerability for both of us for this to happen, right? It takes courage and vulnerability to do something like this. That's the awkwardness about generosity. But I'll tell you what, they touched our hearts and they filled a need because they gave us the exact amount of money that we needed to get up to zero. It's a radical act of generosity that we'll never forget. And I know that that act touched their hearts and it touched our hearts. So generosity, I think, if it's in a church, if it's in a body of people, if it's in relationships, it changes the atmosphere. It changes the culture in the room. It changes the heart, and it's contagious. When people start being generous, other people start being generous. When someone's generous to you, you're generous to others. And the challenge for us today, I think, is this. Where is God asking us? Where is he asking you to open up your heart? Where is God asking us? Where is he asking you? Where is he asking me to pour it out and to let it flow? Where is he asking that question? We need to have our eyes open to see this, to see people through God's eyes, what he wants to do in their lives. We need to have our hearts changed to see people the way Jesus sees people. It's the foundation of generosity. When that happens, we open our hearts, we pour out, and we let it flow. And it changes the atmosphere in the room. It can't be unsmelled generosity. It lingers. It stays there. You might not see who's doing it, but you can smell it in the air. It's in the atmosphere. Something changes. Once it's in the room, you know it. And it's better than brute. I'm telling you that. So God's people, I think, are to smell like generosity. To smell like that. So the character of it fills the room and it changes the atmosphere. So today I'm hoping that God will open up our hearts, speak to us, challenge us to find someone or something, somewhere to pour it out and to help us have the courage and the vulnerability to just let it flow and see what God will do. You know, one of our values of our church is generosity. Did you know that? Generosity is one of the values of our church that I think we are all called to and challenged to step into. And there's a lot of ways to do that. But it comes from a transformed heart. And I just want to say to you guys, it's going to smell really good in here. It already does. You guys smell good. More generous we are, the better it's going to smell, because it's going to smell like God's generosity. And that changes the atmosphere, and you can't unsmell that. Pour it out. Say it one more time, okay? Open up your heart, pour it out, and let it flow. Amen.